Now you can hear me. Sorry about that. Now you can hear me. Welcome, everyone. That's what I would say. I had a problem with the timer. So I have to... You can hear me now, right? I think you can. Yeah. My mixer was muted. That's all what it is. And how is everybody doing? So glad that you were able to make it. You took a little bit of time in your afternoon to study a little bit of Torah. Wonderful parsha this week. I'm just trying to find out what happened here with my computer. Give me 1 second. Where would it be? Probably here. Okay, so this week's Torah portion, we continue with the story of Abraham. That's the whole idea. We continue with the life of Abraham, and more things are going to happen in this week's parsha. This is when actually God tells Abraham that he was going to have a baby with Sarah, and Sarah laughed. Remember that episode? It's a very interesting episode in the Torah, and I don't want to talk too much about that because I recorded at the Vayera in the car this afternoon, early afternoon, I guess. Now it's noon, just a few minutes before the class, and it's exactly about that, about Sarah's laughter and how dare God being upset with Sarah because she laughed. What's Sarah's fault? This is the question. What's Sarah's fault for laughing? She just heard the news that she was going to be a mother at old age from a total stranger. Okay, I know at the end of the day we know that they were angels, right? But she didn't know that. She thought they were just regular people walking by the desert, regular Arabs, people from the area. And she laughed. Who are you? What do you know about myself? Right? Well, if you want to know more about that, don't miss it, because that's we're going to talk about. I'm talking about that for the Vayera in the car this week. So yeah. Well, I hope everybody is doing well this morning. I'm going to remove this and let's begin with the class. Murray Nathan is here. Welcome. Good afternoon to you. And let me bring my slides so we can jump into studying this week's parsha. Here you go. Okay, so this is happening right after Abraham's circumcision. Okay, Abraham got circumcised again, old age, right? He was the first one, and then from that time on, the law was every Jewish male at 8 days old, 8 days of age, we had to be circumcised. But Abraham was the first, and because the commandment came from God when Abraham was already old, well, he has to do it at that time. And you can imagine, it's not easy for an adult to be circumcised. It's not easy in these days. I can't even imagine how it was back in those days. So that's, we can understand why Abraham needed some time to recover and to heal from that procedure. So there seems to be some kind of consensus from the rabbis that this is exactly what happened in this place. The Torah calls it Elonei Mamre, and here is translated as the oaks of Mamre. It may have been a place like a quiet place where Abraham could go just to recover. I don't know if they were healers back in the day. We don't have details, but we just a speculation here, okay? But the agreement is that he was there recovering from his circumcision. So let's see what happened here. Abraham raised his eyes and saw, and there in front of him stood 3 men. Okay, it doesn't say angels, it said men. And he saw them and ran from the tent door to meet them, prostrated himself on the ground and said, My Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, please don't leave your servant. So many things here. Only 3 verses. And there's lots of things to choose from. What should we study first? Well, the first thing you have to understand is, let's go by part. Number 1, God came to visit Abraham. That's the beginning. Adonai appeared to Abraham. Okay? Why? Well, perhaps because Abraham was recovering from a procedure. It's almost like Abraham was in the hospital. And God came to visit him. And the rabbis learn from this verse the mitzvah of Bikur Cholim, of visiting the sick. How do we know that? If God visited Abraham, we have to do the same. We have to go and visit people who are sick, ill, recovering from surgery, etc. Okay? That's all good. Now we say that Abraham was recovering by the circumcision, but from the circumcision, but there is something very interesting. If that's true, can you imagine how much discomfort, if not pain, Abraham has to endure to run? Because that's the word used in the Torah. Vayera. And he ran. It's not that he called them, hey guys, come here. No, he went there to bring them into his tent after the circumcision at old age. Why did he do that? Just to fulfill another mitzvah that we learn from here, that is Hachnasat Orchim, to welcome visitors, guests into our homes, also known as the mitzvah, the commandment of hospitality. So, 2 things Abraham has to overcome in order to welcome these 3 strangers. Number 1, he has to put God in hold. God came to visit Abraham. Abraham was having a spiritual experience. Try to imagine this. Abraham was having a profound spiritual experience. God was there. God came to visit Abraham. And Abraham said, okay, thank you for coming. Hold on a minute. I have 3 people that need my help. It's amazing. It's amazing. But from here, we also learn another commandment. Hi, Josue Selva, welcome. Shelly Chochinov, welcome, good afternoon. We learn another mitzvah. That basically what happened is, if you're in a synagogue and you're praying and somebody's having an emergency or somebody needs something, yes, you can stop your prayers and go help. That's exactly what Abraham did here. Abraham was, I guess you can say, praying or having this spiritual experience, the awareness of the presence of God in whatever form he was having it at the time. Whatever it was very intense, but he stopped that because there were 3 people that needed him. So he put people over the spiritual experience. Not always our attitude, but it's something that we learn from Abraham. I didn't invented it. He did. Okay? The other thing is, this was during the heat of the day, at the worst time of the day. But I guess in Winnipeg doesn't make much sense. You can't imagine it. But if you come from a country like Argentina and Buenos Aires, for example, in the middle of the summer, at noon, outside, it's crazy. It's even dangerous. So what was Abraham doing at that time, recovering from the circumcision at noon, in the middle of the day, when it was very hot in the desert? Well, he was actually trying to spot people who may need a little refreshment, who may need his help. So it's not only that he ran to bring them into his home, he was actually actively outside at a time that he knew that nobody else will be there looking after visitors. So this is something very interesting. Shaarey Chachinov, what do you say here? Let's see. I didn't highlight any of the messages today. How rude of me. He didn't have a cell phone, but could we, in an emergency, while in shul on Shabbat? Of course. Yeah, of course you can. Emergency is an emergency. Yeah. Maybe he did have a cell phone. Who knows? Right? Who knows? Because basically, according to archaeological diggings, there were no cables found. So that may say that they already have everything wireless. Who knows? Otherwise, they would have found cables or something. Who knows? Okay, so back to our... Shaarey, you said he actually had a direct line with God. Yeah, but actually, it's interesting that the Torah will say later on that the only one with a direct line to God was Moses. That's what the Torah says. The only one with the direct line to God was Moses. Actually, let me say something. It wasn't part of the class, but now that you mention it, Shaarey, just let me say it. That the fact that it says there that he sat at the entrance of the tent is very important, because he was sitting and God came to visit when he was sitting. Usually the language towards prophets is that they were standing, and that standing implies preparation, in the sense that you have to prepare yourself to receive the presence of God. It's not just like that. You have to, it's almost like when you want to tune into a radio, you have to take the dial and find the right frequency. So for a prophet, that means spiritual preparation before you can have this kind of epiphany and you can feel the presence of God. So we don't see that from Abraham. So since Moses was the only one with a direct line from God, in the sense that he didn't need to prepare himself, the rabbis are clear about that. Moses was the only one who did not have to prepare himself. Abraham had to. So if Abraham was one of those who had to prepare himself to experience God, how could it be that the Torah here is using the word that he was sitting at the entrance of the tent? And the explanation seems to be that because he was circumcised, the act of the circumcision put him temporarily at a higher level. And this is something that the rabbis say that happens at the day of circumcision of a baby, that for the moment of the circumcision, the spiritual awareness of that baby is higher than everybody else in the room because of that act. So it seems to imply that the circumcision of Abraham put him temporarily in a higher state that allowed him to have this special awareness of the presence of God. That's what it says. Okay, so let's go back to some other words that the rabbis try to explain from this text. So far, let me summarize. We talk about Abraham putting God on hold to attend these three people. So now what happened is that we have the Midrash Rabbah explaining the word at the entrance to the tent. Now, Midrash Rabbi is trying to explain why do we need to know that it was at the entrance of the tent. No detail in the Torah is random. So what is the Torah trying to convey, to explain when it said the tent, when it's physically mentioned it? Well, this is what the Midrash Rabbah says. God said to Abraham, you have opened a good door to passerby, to visitors. You have opened a good door for converts. Because remember, I mentioned this last class that Abraham was always trying to convince people, say them, you don't have to pay me with money for what you ate. All you have to do is to bless the name of God. And he would start talking about theology with his visitors, trying to convince them that there was one God. And this is what Midrash Rabbah is talking about here. Okay. For if it were not for you, I would not have created heaven and earth. And it is written regarding the heavens, he who sits above the circle of the earth, for whom its inhabitants appear like grasshoppers, stretches out the heavens like a curtain, spreads them out like a tent to live in. So, furthermore, for if it were not for you, I would not have created the orb of the sun. As is written, in them he places a tent for the sun. So here it's very interesting. This is the Midrash. Remember, Midrash Rabbi is trying to find other pieces of scripture where the word tent is used, and then Midrash Rabbi is actually asking why is God using the word tent in those other pieces of scripture, and they arrive to the conclusion that they are connected with these verses in the book of Genesis. So, for example, I brought you one example of one rabbi trying to explain the words of Midrash Rabbi. Here, the Rabbi Shmuel Yafe Ashkenazi says, the Midrash is saying that it was in the merit of Abraham, who sits at the entrance of his tent, that the world, which is also called the tent, was created. Now, this is what we have to understand whenever we read the Midrash. Sometimes people make the mistake to say, oh, this is an amazing miracle. And you try to analyze how could that happen and go into the physicalities of the miracle and so forth. But that's not the goal of the Midrash. The Midrash is not there to present facts. The Midrash is there to present truths. Facts and truth are not the same. Sometimes you can have stories that they are not factual, but nevertheless they teach a truth. Very profound. Let's see if you can understand that. Sometimes you have stories that they may not be factual, but nevertheless they present a truth. Can we prove that any of this actually happened? Can we even prove that the stories in the Torah, Abraham, the tent and thing, are a fact? We cannot. But we can take the whole story as a universal truth. As a universal truth that is teaching us something for our own lives. So what does it mean here that in merit of Abraham, God created the world? The tent is not about the tent. It's about what the tent symbolizes. What does the tent symbolize? Everything that I mentioned at the beginning of the class. The tent symbolizes that Abraham was having an amazing spiritual experience, and nevertheless he put it on hold to help people. The tent symbolizes that Abraham could actually be ready to fulfill the mitzvah of hospitality by waiting in his house. And if somebody shows up and says, sure, come in, I'll feed you. But that's not what Abraham did. What Abraham did was proactively going out of the way, overcoming pain, putting God in hold. Who knows when God was going to come again? Nevertheless, he preferred to do that in order to help other people. So those are, among other things, are represented by the tent. So basically what the Midrash is saying here is that God created the world thanks to the merit of every human being in this planet performing acts of kindness like Abraham. That's what the tent represents. The tent represents kindness. And if we can live a life of kindness, then we are justifying the creation of heaven and earth. And that's the truth that the Midrash is teaching, even though the words may not be factual. But you can't deny that there is a profound truth there. Who is here from the Bahamas? Howlover Bay. Well, welcome to the class. Welcome to the class. It's amazing how we have people from all over the world. Maybe from all over the universe. Who knows how far the internet goes now that we have internet and satellites, thanks to Elon Musk. Who knows? Okay, So this is something I wanted to teach you about a little bit about the beginning of the Parsha. Now I guess we can move on to the next stage, the next few verses. Let's continue now with verses 4 to 8. Okay? So, Abraham said now to these visitors, please let me send for some water so that you can wash your feet, then rest under the tree. Okay? Pay attention to this, because this is what Abraham actually promised these people. All the thing that Abraham is promising them is water and a shade under a tree. But let's see what actually happened. Oh, and bread, sorry. And I will bring a piece of bread. That's what Abraham promised. Now that you have come to your servant, refresh yourself before going on. Very well, they replied, do what you have said. Now Abraham hurried into the tent of Sarah and said, quickly, 3 measures of the best flour, knead it and make cakes. Probably matzah, right? Because it wouldn't have time to rise. Even though the Torah doesn't say this, but it's probably matzah. Because it's not, yeah. Abraham ran to the herd, took a good tender calf, and gave it to the servant who hurried to prepare it. Then he took curds, milk, and the calf which he had prepared, and set it all before the men, and he stood by them under the tree as they ate. This is amazing. Okay, I see what you say here, Shaarey Chochinov. You say bread and water equals life. Yes, that's true. And bye, Priscilla. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for being here. It's a great merit for you that you take time during your busy afternoon to study a little bit of Torah. So good for you. Have a wonderful day and hope to see you next week. Yeah, but Shelley, what I said, that's what Abraham promised, but that's not what happened. And we also learn something very important from these verses, because sometimes we do the opposite. We promise big and we deliver little. Abraham, on the other hand, promised little and delivered big. You understand this? It's a big principle that we learn from this story. Don't promise too much. Just like Abraham. A little bit of shade, a little bit of water, a little bit of bread. But instead, he gave them a feast without promising that. The other thing we learn from here, and this is something that we are going to be able to compare whenever we study the story of Lot, Abraham's nephew. Remember, Lot ended up moving to the city of Sodom. And eventually, something very similar happens, because these same angels that came to visit Abraham, after announcing to Abraham that he was going to be a father, they go to Sodom to rescue Lot. So the city of Sodom could be destroyed and Lot and his family could be spared. Now, Lot also welcomed these visitors. But the difference is, number one, he promised little and he delivers little. But nothing wrong with that, I guess. It's always better to be like Abraham and to give a lot to strangers. But the only difference that the rabbis found between the story of Abraham and the story of Lot is how Abraham involved his entire household into the fulfillment of the mitzvah. While Lot, it was very clear that he may have been a decent person, but he was alone, because when Lot receives these strangers, nobody helped him to protect them or to feed them or anything like that. No one. He was by himself. And the rabbis seems to read there that then we can understand how sometimes the place where you live will change you. When Lot was living with Abraham, he was probably the same. And in fact, he probably learned from Abraham to welcome strangers and things. But then when you compare the way Abraham was doing this and involving his family and teaching others how to be kind to strangers, Lot seems to have failed at that, at teaching those values to his own family. And then we see him alone fulfilling these commandments. Just a little interesting contrast between Abraham and Lot. Still, what Lot did seems to be enough to save him from the destruction of Sodom, but not at Abraham levels, specifically because he did not involve his household into helping the strangers. Okay, so this is all what but by the way, the other thing that some people always found in this text is, hey, how come he offered these people the calf, beef, with milk? How is that possible? That's not kosher. We know that we cannot put together in the same meal milk and meat. But the answer is quite easy. The Torah hasn't been revealed yet. That specific piece of halakha, Jewish law, was not revealed to Abraham. In that generation, there was no prohibition into mixing meat with milk. The only prohibition that generation had towards animals were the animal has to be slaughtered before you can eat it. It has to be killed. You can't eat an animal part while the animal is still alive. And the other restriction was you have to drain the blood from the animal, which, by the way, is not something that is just from Judaism. It's common practice in the Middle East, and it's called death by exsanguination. So basically, you make a cut in the side of the neck of an animal, and then you hang the animal, so gravity will take care of all the blood. So you hang it there for a while until all the blood gets out of the animal. So you drain the animal for blood, and then you can eat the meat. Judaism goes a step a little further, which is to you cut the animal open, and then you have to use salt to absorb leftovers of the blood, just to be sure that we fulfill the law of the Torah the proper way. Okay, but it's So going back to this, there was no prohibition of eating milk and beef at the same time at the time of Abraham. Okay, so let's continue with more words about these verses that I just read from Midrash Rabbah. Okay, here Midrash Rabbah will say that there are 6 separate ways in which Abraham served the angels, and there are 6 corresponding rewards that Israel will receive in the future because of what Abraham did. So Rabbi Eleazar said in the name of Rabbi Simai, the Holy One, blessed is he, said to Abraham, you said, please let me send for some water. Okay. By your life, said God, I will repay your children with water in the wilderness, in the land of Israel, and in the Messianic future. And we know that this was a miraculous well that was traveling with the Jewish people in their journey from Egypt to the Promised Land. So why did they deserve that well of water? Because what Abraham did in the past, these total strangers. Welcome, Kashuchuka. Shoka? Shalom. Welcome to the class. We are studying the Torah portion called Vayera, which is the Torah portion we read in synagogue this week. Let's continue. Reason number 2. You said, so you can wash your feet. By your life, I will repay your children by cleansing them with water in the wilderness, in the land of Israel, and in the Messianic future. You said, then rest under the tree. By your life, I will repay your children by sheltering them in the wilderness, in the land of Israel, and in the Messianic future. This specific promise from God is related to the festival of Sukkot. And the fact, remember we studied that the Sukkah mentioned in the Torah may have been a reference to the cloud of glory. These clouds that they were protecting the people of Israel from the land, from Egypt to the Promised Land. Why the cloud of glory? Because of what Abraham did in the past. Okay. Then you said, and I will bring a piece of bread. By your life, I will repay your children by sustaining them in the wilderness, in the land of Israel and the Messianic future. This is a reference to the manna. Similarly, it's written, Abraham ran to the herd, took a good, tender calf, By your life I will repay your children with abundance of meat in the wilderness, in the land of Israel, in the messianic future. And this is a reference to the quail that God sent them. Similarly is written, and he stood by them under the tree as they ate. Oh, I forgot to mention that. That's another thing that we learned here, and how Abraham was with the guest. It's just that he led them there, just stay there, eat, I don't want to see you, right? Just eat and leave. No, he stayed there. Make them feel special, important, welcomed. So that is also expressed there, and something that we learn. Okay? And stood by them under the tree as they ate. By your life I will repay your children by attending to their needs and protecting them in the wilderness, in the land of Israel, and in the messianic future. And this is the reference of the presence of God even outside Israel, what we call the Shekhinah, that is coming with us everywhere we go. Okay, I want to talk more about that in a minute. So Jerome Fomin, what do you say here? He said, if a well traveled with them, why did Moses have to get water from a rock? Very good question. Because the rabbis also say that the other reason why the well was there was Miriam. Once Miriam died, that well dried out. Okay? And still, it's not just the well, it's any kind of miraculous water that came to them in the desert. You have to admit that the water coming from the rock was also miraculous. So one way or another, water was guaranteed because of this act of kindness of Abraham. So there are other examples in Jewish literature explaining that because of somebody else's merit, we can enjoy something in our generations, or in a different generation. Let's say, because somebody else did something in the past, that a future generation can enjoy a special blessing. There are other examples. I wanted to show you just one here. Rabbi Yosef, son of Rabbi Yehuda, said, 3 excellent leaders arose in Israel. They are Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. And because of them, 3 excellent gifts were bestowed upon Israel. They are the well, again. So it's not just water, now it's specific, it's the well. The pillar of clouds and the manna. The well was provided in the merit of Miriam, the pillar of cloud in the merit of Aaron, and the manna in the merit of Moses. So, and I know there is a little overlap between the two texts, the text from the Talmud in Masechet Ta'anit and the text of Midrash Rabbah. But again, it's not about the facts, it's about the message that these texts are trying to teach us. What is the truth behind this text? And hey, I'm asking all of you, what do you think is the truth behind this text? Try to detach yourself for a minute from the literal story and try to find the principle behind the text. Let's see if somebody wants to answer that. Meanwhile, I will have a little bit of water. It's very dry in here. Starbus Solaris. Like it when you say. You said, yes, goodness goes down generations. Yeah, I will have to agree. That's what it is. The thing is, you never know your good action that you do today, that act of kindness that you perform today, you never know what kind of an impact it's going to have in the future. It's almost like every act of kindness that we perform snowballs into bigger kindness. Yeah, Jerome, you said here, doing mitzvahs can have far-reaching effects. Exactly, like you never know. So the message that the Midrash is trying to give us is every time we have an opportunity to do kindness, to do something good, we should take it and do it, because, and the Torah will mention in a different place how the kindness continues from 1,000 generations. So every time you do an act of kindness, it's almost like you you have a spiritual bank account that is going to be present, not necessarily in your life, but in the future, in other generations. And who said that sometimes the blessings that we experience in our lives, and we don't understand, why is God so good to me? I don't deserve it. Well, maybe somebody else in another generation, a family member maybe. It's act of kindness, and you are actually reaping the fruits now. It's so your goal, your job, your obligation is also to perform acts of kindness that eventually are going to be felt by future generation, the same way that you are enjoying blessings that maybe were brought to you from somebody else. Who knows? Who knows? But that's the principle that the Midrash is trying to take. You know what I mean? If you get stuck with trying to analyze it, did it really happen? Did it happen that way? You won't go anywhere. You're going to get trapped there and not learn the point that the Midrash is trying to teach you. Shaarey Chachinov. You say, we perform a mitzvah for its own sake, not for the expectation of the reward. That's correct. And that's why I like this thing from this Midrash, that it will say that the rewards themselves were not felt by the people who perform the mitzvahs, but in the future. But again, when you perform a mitzvah, you may not do it for the reward, but you should know. You should know that eventually, somebody is going to be going to enjoy the benefit of that mitzvah that you fulfill. Especially in this case, it's talking about not any mitzvah, it's talking about acts of kindness. Acts of kindness. So kindness gets repaid with kindness. But this is the trick, not necessarily directly to you, but sometimes it's going to be felt in the future. Yeah. So let me bring you an example here. Is another rabbi who's trying to bring an analogy of this principle that we are talking about. Okay, so this is Rabbi Chaim Leib Milevich, and he says, a huge tree may grow from a small seed, but only if the seed is implanted in earth and then provided with water and sunlight. It is the combination of all these elements that allows a tree to sprout. The seeds from which the manna, the pillar of clouds, and the wells sprouted were indeed Abraham's, and some other will argue also Moses, Aaron, and Miriam's, acts of kindness. However, it was the nutrients provided by the merits of Moses, Aaron, and Miriam that ultimately caused those seeds to blossom as they did into wondrous resources for the Jewish people. And it is amazing because now this rabbi is trying to explain why these two texts overlap, the text from Midrash Rabbah and the text from the Talmud. Why are they talking about the same thing? Is it because of Abraham that we enjoy this, or is it because Moses, Aaron, and Miriam? I said both, because both the two of them represents two different things. It doesn't mean that, that's what I said, that they did different things, but because they came at different times, they represent different things. So this is a powerful lesson about the value of every small and possibly seemingly insignificant good deed. Even a slight inclination towards goodness may give birth to a seed that has within it the potential to grow over years of germination into something remarkable. Conversely, as well, any slight leaning towards evil may one day produce frightening results. So in other words, what this rabbi is saying is every act of kindness that we do has the potential to become something great, especially if you have people coming after you, that they were, so to speak, follow up into the kindness that you perform, and they also continue to perform kindness, and that eventually becomes nutrients for the first act of kindness that it was performed originally. So which means is you can say, well, no, that, you know what, I have somebody else doing all those things. You can do. It doesn't matter how many people are doing good in the world. You can also do good. It's as simple as that. Never pass by an opportunity to do good. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing that we can all learn. Any comments? Ledor Vador. Yeah, Ledor Vador. It's but for those of you who don't speak Hebrew, Ledor Vador means from generation to generation, and it's something that we have it in our prayers. Ledor Vador Nagid Gotlecha, from generation to generation, we are going to proclaim God's holiness. You see, it's interesting that it doesn't matter that somebody did it in the past. We have to keep doing it in every generation. So the hope is that God's holiness and awareness in the world will get multiplied if we all do it and we never stop doing it, and the next generation continue doing it. The same happens with good deeds. Okay, so let's continue. I want to bring now the next set of verses so we can study a little bit. Now, who's they? The three visitors said to him, to Abraham, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" Well, he said, "They are in the tent." He said, now it's one of the three visitors talking, okay? "I will certainly return to you around this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son." Sarah heard him from the entrance of the tent behind him. Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself, thinking, "I am old, and so is my Lord. Am I to have pleasure again?" Adonai said to Abraham, "What did Sarah laugh and asked? Am I really going to bear a child when I am so old?" Okay, what's wrong about this? What's wrong about the way this is written? That's not exactly what Sarah said. What God now is quoting back. What Sarah said is that I'm an old and so is my Lord. So it's almost like she's blaming Abraham because she cannot have children. She's saying Abraham is too old. And that God said to Abraham, what did Sarah laugh, saying that she is too old? Whoa, that's not what happened here. So why will God change the words when God communicated to Abraham? Isn't that lying? Or perhaps it's something that we can learn from the fact that God actually lied here. Why will God lie or distort the reality a little bit? Why do you think that this happened? Right? Well, let me bring once again Midrash Rabbah. A Midrash Rabbah, we have a rabbi, it's called Bar Kapara. And he said, "Great is the cause of peace. For even Scripture itself spoke untruthfully in order to preserve peace between Abraham and Sarah." So Bar Kapara here in Midrash Rabbah, he agrees that actually God lied. Why did God lie to distort the truth in this way? To preserve peace. So this kind of attitude that God had is called Shalom Bait. It's something that, he kind of changed a little bit of the word to preserve the peace in the home. Jose Suelva is joking. Who is joking? I don't understand explain to me what you're trying to say. Joking. It's but so this is what it says. That's God tried to preserve the peace. Can you imagine if God would say to Abraham, "Why is Sarah laughing, saying that you are too old?" And then Abraham would look at God and said, "What did she say? That I'm too old? She's the old one, and she's blaming me." Boom. That's seed for a bigger fight. But if you say that Abraham is laughing, because probably Abraham was also wondering, what is she laughing? What is she laughing at? Is she laughing at me? And God said, no, she's laughing because she thinks she's too old. End of the discussion. No fights between them. In fact, you may open the door for Abraham to bring some support to Sarah and try to cheer her up and said, no, nothing is impossible for God, and so forth. Can God joke? No, it's not a joke. It's not a joke. It's actually, I think in this case, it's not that God cannot joke. God probably is very funny. In fact, there is a famous conversation that it was an interview to Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan. He was a very famous, he was a Kabbalah scholar and a Torah scholar and a Talmud scholar. Unfortunately, he died very young. And he was talking about the important sense of humor in Judaism, especially in education, right? And he was asking an interview if there are any jokes in the Talmud. and he said, yes, of course there are, but they are all old. It's 2,000 years old book. He said, yeah, they're all jokes. I thought he was funny. Yeah, kind of funny. Here you said Starbucks. You said, maybe can God lie? God's words are true. Well, this is the interesting thing, because sometimes you have to understand what scriptures are calling true or lie. Just be patient with me for 1 minute, and you will see what I'm trying to say here. Okay, so let's go first to Rabbi Chaim Leib-Shmulevitz. Again, he said, this act of God is an indication of the tremendous severity in which He, God, views even the slightest division between two people. It also is instructive of our great obligation to secure harmony and suppress even the remotest possibility of discord. Okay, he's almost talking about things that sometimes you have to put aside in order to preserve peace. It's not just truth. Sometimes you have to physically, or you have to give up certain things in order to make peace with somebody else. Okay. Now, but there is more than that. This ruling is not merely an indication of the immense value that the Torah places on peace. Okay. More than that, it is a revelation of the true parameters of emet, truth, that the Torah values so, and the sheker, falsehood, that it scorns. Emet, by the way, emet is the Hebrew word for truth. Emet, which is commonly defined simply as truth, actually refers to anything that will bring a result that is desirable to God, and sheker is the opposite. While truthfulness is more often emet, in a situation where the interest of peace will best be served by dishonesty, that represents the emet. An obligation to emulate God, whose seal is emet, according to the Talmud, requires that we cling unflinchingly to emet, but we are simultaneously enjoined to recognize that straightforwardness, which will lead to disintegration of relationships, is not emet at all. It's very interesting. So in emet, which we translate as truth, does not necessarily means truthfulness if the end result is destruction or separation. Now, the Rabbi, this is just the concept in a nutshell. You can understand that if you go to the Talmud, it's going to be a larger discussion of this. And here we are talking about God, who absolutely knows the end result of everything. We have to be more careful because we don't have the same capacity as God has to kind of see where everything is going. So we have to be careful about that. White lie, that's the way we call it in this day, Shaarey Church, I will say so. Yeah, it's a little white lie. But in this case, it's exclusively just to preserve the Shalom Bayit, the peace in the home. So the Rambam will say, for example, great is peace, for the entire Torah was given only to increase peace in the world. So if the entire Torah was given to increase peace, so everything, every decision we make should have as an end result to say, whatever I'm doing, is it bringing peace closer or further? And I have a couple more texts for you here, because the Talmud is trying to understand why it's so important to preserve specifically, because let's go back to the example in the Torah. The specific example is the peace between husband and wife, or the peace between two partners living together. Let's try to think with a 21st century mentality, okay? And why is it said that's extremely important? So the Talmud will say, Rava said, it is obvious to me that there is a fixed list of priorities. When a person is poor and must choose between purchasing oil to light a Shabbat lamp for his home, or purchasing oil to light a Hanukkah lamp, the Shabbat lamps for his home takes precedence. That is due to peace in his home. Without the light of that lamp, his family will be sitting and eating their meal in the dark and creating tension in the family. You see, it's typical. One partner will blame the other, because it's this, and so we have to be careful. Similarly, if there is a conflict between acquiring oil to light a lamp for his home and wine for the sanctification of Shabbat, what do? Again, you have to get the lamp to avoid tension. The same way that, sanctification of Shabbat, what it means to have a religious experience. But we learn from Abraham that you can put that aside in order to attend human needs, which in this case is to preserve peace in the home. And the rabbis also, in another page of the Talmud, will put in beautiful words. Rabbi Akiva taught, if a man, ish, that's the Hebrew word for man, ish, and a woman, isha, merit reward through a faithful marriage, the divine presence rests between them. Beautiful, right? So this is very important. If there is peace between the two, the presence of God is there. The word ish and isha are almost identical. The difference between them is the middle letter yud in ish and the final letter hey in isha. I put it there for you so you can actually see the difference. The top one is ish, the bottom one is isha. These two letters can be joined to form the name of God spelled yud hey, Yah, which is one of the names of God. Hallelujah, Yah. The word hallelujah means praise be God. Hallelujah. Yah is one of the names of God. So these two letters can be joined to form the name of God spelled Yud Hey, Yah. But if due to licentiousness they do not merit reward, the divine presence departs. And then what is left there? If you remove the ish, the yud from ish, and the hey from isha. For those of you who read Hebrew, what is aleph shin? What word? I will delete it here, so you can see it. What is it? I will do it right now. Oops. What word is that? Forget about the Jerome Fomin. Esh. Fire. Fire. In other words, what it says is if you remove the presence of God from a home, all what is left is fire. Fire in the sense of destruction, of the tension between the parties. So what is the secret for a happy marriage? To preserve the peace so we can deserve the presence of God within that home. That is what this Midrash is coming to teach us. And that's why the value of Shalom Bait is so important. And it means that sometimes you can bend a little bit halakha, also Jewish law, in order to preserve the peace in the home. So this is what I had for you today. I'm glad that look, 1 p.m. Whew, we did it. So thank you so much for everyone for coming today to study a little bit of Torah. I would like to, before everyone goes on your own way to continue with the rest of your day, I would like to remind you that this Friday we have a very special Kabbalah Shabbat. I have it here. It's an enhanced Kabbalah Shabbat at the Shaarey Zedek, and it's going to be led by myself, Leslie, and Jay Stoller. It's going to be at 5:30, and you can watch it online, of course, as always. But the difference is you can also come to enjoy it in person. You can actually, I can move myself so you can see what time it is. Live stream Friday, October 22nd at 5:30 p.m. But also remember, you can come in person to the Shaarey Zedek to enjoy it. And we have 150 is our limit for the sanctuary, but we're not expecting to reach that number, so we decided to get rid of the pre-registration for now. You just have to show up with your vaccination card and your ID, and you will be able to attend the services. But if you are living somewhere else and you don't feel comfortable coming, you still have the service online, the same channels are using now to attend this class. So thank you so much for being there. Remember, give us a thumbs up. If you haven't done so, subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell so you will be notified every time we go live or every time we upload something to our channels. We always want to let you know when that happens, but for that you have to be subscribed, and then you have to hit the bell. That notifications will keep coming to your inbox. So thank you so much for being there. Have a wonderful day, wonderful weekend. Shabbat Shalom. Hope to see you soon. Bye, everyone.